Thunder growled above the hills of Ediora, rolling like the deep voice of an angry ancestor. The sky split open, and lightning carved white scars across the clouds. Women rushed to gather their children indoors while the men lifted their eyes to the sacred hills, the resting place of the old gods. The air smelled of rain and something older, something unseen. The elders sat beneath the great Iroko tree, murmuring among themselves. "The spirits are restless," whispered Elder Koro, his voice trembling like the wind through dry leaves. "The thunder speaks of what was buried, a prophecy waiting beneath the Red River." No one dared to question him. In Ediora, thunder was never just thunder. It was a message. And that night, even the drummers kept silent, afraid their beats might wake something best left sleeping. Ediora was a kingdom balanced on a trembling bridge, half in the world of faith, half in the world of fear. Church bells rang on Sunday mornings, but by dusk, the scent of burning herbs drifted from the shrines. The people bowed to both the cross and the ancestral drums, never certain which power truly ruled the land. They lived by a quiet understanding that every miracle carried its shadow. A child healed might one day fall ill again. A blessing received might come at a price unseen. The gods and God share the same sky, the villagers often said, but their thunder never sounds alike. Even the air in Ediora carried mystery, prayers and chants blending into one sound, like two rivers flowing together but never mixing. It was into this world that Pastor Oba rose, a man who spoke of heaven with such passion that even the birds seemed to pause and listen. He was young, tall, and fierce-eyed, his voice a storm that stirred hearts. When he prayed, people said the sick stood up and the blind saw. Mothers carried their dying children to his sermons, and farmers brought him gifts of yam and honey in gratitude. God has chosen him, they said. He walks with angels. But others whispered a different tale, that the fire in his hands came not from heaven, but from the old tongues of the ancestors, the same power once sealed beneath the Red River. One night, as Oba prayed alone by the riverbank, lightning struck the water. For a moment it glowed red, not with fire but with life. He stared into the river's shimmering surface, and a voice echoed softly beneath the ripples. Every light must choose its shadow. He looked around, heart racing, but saw no one, only the water staring back, calm, knowing, and ancient. Oba lifted his eyes toward the storming sky and whispered, "Lord, if it is you, speak again." But the river remained silent. Only the wind answered, carrying the faint rhythm of ancestral drums far in the distance. And so began the story of a man who preached of heaven, while standing on the edge of forgotten gods. The morning sun rose softly over Ediora, painting the village in gold. At the heart of the marketplace, where traders called out and drums beat like the rhythm of life itself, walked Amina, the prophetess whose spirit was said to shine brighter than dawn. She moved with a calm grace, her white garments fluttering like the wings of a dove. When she smiled, even the wind seemed to pause and listen. Children ran to her, their little hands reaching to touch her robes. "Mama Amina, will you tell us what the rain said today?" one of them asked. Amina knelt and touched the child's cheek. "The rain said it comes not to drown but to feed. Even storms bring life, my child." Her voice was soft, yet it carried power, the kind that healed hearts more than wounds. The elders often said that when Amina prayed, heaven opened its ears. Her visions came not with thunder, but like whispers on the wind, words carried by unseen spirits. Yet behind every whisper of light, a shadow listens, across the same village, in the same bloodline. Another woman watched from her window, Amina's twin, Adana. Her eyes were sharp, her beauty undeniable, but her heart carried storms that never calmed. Everywhere she went, she heard her sister's name sung like a hymn. Amina the Blessed, Amina the Chosen, Amina who sees beyond the veil. Adana clenched her fists. "And what am I?" she muttered bitterly. "The twin who was born second. The one the midwife feared to touch." She turned toward the mirror, studying the faint serpent-shaped mark that coiled around her shoulder. the mark that made the villagers whisper when they thought she couldn't hear. "Cursed," they called her, the shadow born with light. But Adana did not fear shadows. She envied them. "If they bow to her for her peace," she said quietly, "they will one day bow to me for my power." That night, while the drums of Ediora sang the song of harvest, Adana sat beneath the ancient baobab tree, the one said to be older than time. Her thoughts grew darker than the sky above her. "Why must light always lead?" she whispered. "Why must shadow always follow?" Unbeknownst to her, an old man watched from afar, Elder Koro, the keeper of the village's deepest secrets. His walking staff, carved with sacred symbols, glowed faintly under the moonlight. He had seen the twins since birth and carried a truth heavier than age itself. He sighed deeply. "Two daughters of one womb," he murmured to the wind, "born beneath the eclipse, one blessed by sun, the other claimed by shadow. The covenant is stirring again." In the silence of the night, the river nearby shimmered faintly red, as if listening. The spirit of the Red River, ancient, betrayed, and waiting, rippled softly, as though smiling beneath the surface. Elder Koro closed his eyes and pressed his palm against the earth. "May the ancestors hold them both," he whispered, "for if they turn against each other, the land will bleed once more." The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a low, haunting sound, half whisper, half warning, and somewhere deep within Ediora, two hearts, bound by blood, divided by destiny, began to walk separate paths. One toward light, the other toward the river's shadow. Thunder growled above the sacred hills of Ediora, shaking the sleeping earth. The Red River, calm for generations, now raged with a voice of its own. The villagers stood at its banks in silence, their oil lamps trembling in the storm's breath. The water, once clear as morning dew, glowed faintly red, like the blood of a wounded spirit. An old fisherman dropped his net and gasped, his voice trembling. "By the ancestors, I saw faces beneath the waves." Another crossed himself with shaking hands. "The river remembers," he whispered. That night, the village drums fell silent. Even the wind refused to sing. Elders gathered beneath the ancient baobab, their eyes heavy with fear. "This storm is not of the sky," said Elder Koro gravely. "It is the river calling. Something long buried beneath its depths has awakened." Lightning tore across the sky again, striking the forest edge, and in that flash, a faint red mist rose from the river, curling into the heavens like smoke from an unseen fire. Far away, miles beyond Ediora's sacred borders, a man woke from his sleep drenched in sweat. Pastor Oba gasped for air as if pulled from deep water. In the dim light of his small hut, his Bible lay open, the pages fluttering though there was no wind. He grabbed it with trembling hands, his voice shaking. "Lord, what is this?" Then came the whisper, not from the Bible, not from the room, but from within his very soul. "Find the woman with two faces." He froze. "Who speaks? Find her before the river claims her." The voice faded, leaving only the sound of his heart pounding like a distant drum. Pastor Oba fell to his knees. "A woman with two faces. What madness is this?" But the vision would not release him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a river turning red, and a woman standing between light and shadow, one half glowing, the other dark as night. The next morning, he packed his staff, his Bible, and a single loaf of bread. As he walked toward the rising sun, he muttered, "If this is the voice of heaven, I must obey. And if it is not, may heaven forgive me." Days passed as he journeyed through forests and across dusty plains, led only by faith and the echo of that haunting command, "Find the woman with two faces." When he finally reached Ediora, the drums had begun to beat again, slow, rhythmic, alive. The air was heavy with incense and song. Women in bright cloth danced around the sacred grove where Amina, the prophetess, stood healing a sick child. Her hands glowed faintly in the golden light. Pastor Oba stopped at the edge of the crowd. The world seemed to hold its breath. As Amina lifted her gaze, her eyes met his, and time froze. The chants faded. Even the birds fell silent. It was as if two souls recognized each other before the body could understand. Her lips parted softly. "You have come," she said, her voice calm, yet full of awe. As it was written, the villagers gasped and fell to their knees. "The prophecy," one cried. "The preacher from the mountains, the one seen in her visions." Drums roared to life again, echoing across the land. Elder Koro stepped forward, his face unreadable, yet his eyes filled with both wonder and dread. He whispered under his breath, "The river has remembered, and destiny has begun its work." Pastor Oba, still trembling, bowed his head before Amina. "If you are the one I was sent to find," he said softly, "then may heaven help us both. For I do not know whether I come bearing a blessing or a curse." The wind rose again, carrying with it the distant murmur of the Red River, a sound that now felt eerily alive. A sound that now felt eerily alive. The sun blazed high over Ediora, and the drums of joy shook the ground. From every hill and hut, people came dressed in bright wrappers and shining beads. The air was sweet with palm wine and roasted yam. Laughter rolled like thunder as dancers moved in circles, stamping their feet to the beat of the talking drums. Today was the day heaven and earth would join. The marriage of Pastor Oba and Amina, the healer who had once spoken to the spirits of the Red River. The elders said their union was written before the first stone of Ediora was laid. "It is not man who joins them," murmured the high priestess, "but destiny itself." Oba stood tall, his white robe glowing like morning light. Amina's veil shimmered with gold threads that caught the sun, and when she smiled, even the children went silent, for her beauty carried peace. But as the dancers sang of blessings and long life, a strange wind swept through the crowd. It carried the scent of wet earth and something older, something restless. The flame of every lantern flickered. Old Mama Uduak, sitting by the fire, muttered to herself, "When joy becomes too loud, sorrow listens." No one paid attention. The music grew louder, the laughter brighter. Yet from the forest's edge, unseen eyes watched, eyes that had waited too long in silence. Suddenly, the drummers stopped. The crowd turned as a lone figure appeared. She moved like a shadow among light, tall, graceful, wrapped in a crimson cloth that flowed behind her like fire. Her anklets jingled softly as she walked, and her face bore a smile too calm for such a moment. Amina's hands trembled. "Adana?" she whispered. The crowd gasped. It was the lost twin, the sister no one spoke of. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, swept over the gathering until they met Pastor Oba's. "A prophet's bed," she said in a voice smooth as oil, "must never be shared with his shadow." Silence fell like night. The priestess dropped her staff. The wind howled through the trees. Amina took a step forward, her face pale as moonlight. "Sister, why have you come?" Adana's smile deepened. "To witness what has been stolen from me." Her words hung heavy, and before anyone could answer, the sky growled again, thunder rolling over the hills. She turned away and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind whispers, fear, and the bitter taste of omen. That night, as the last guests left the feast, Pastor Oba entered the small church to pray. The candles flickered though no wind blew. He dipped his hand into the basin of holy water and froze. The water had turned red, thick like blood. His breath caught. "Father in heaven," he whispered, "what is this sign?" But only his own voice answered him, echoing strangely from the walls. The air grew colder. The cross above the altar creaked. Then he heard it, a woman's laughter, faint and distant, carried by the wind from the riverbank. He dreamed that night. He stood before the Red River, its waves whispering like tongues. A woman rose from the water, her face hidden beneath a veil. When she lifted it, Oba saw himself staring back. The reflection twisted, smiled, and said softly, "The river remembers." He woke drenched in sweat, his heartbeat pounding like the sacred drums of Ediora. Outside, the real drums began to sound, slow, deep, warning of a storm that had only begun. The sun had long bowed to the western hills, and the village of Ediora lay quiet beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient baobab. Its thick roots curled over the red earth like the fingers of an old spirit, holding secrets too heavy for human tongues. Beneath it sat Adana, silent, still, her eyes following the shadows that danced across the dust. The villagers passed her as though she were smoke. Mothers pulled their children close. Old men muttered short prayers beneath their breath. And the children, oh, the children, they whispered as they played. There she is, one said softly, his voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. The girl with the serpent mark, another added, his eyes wide. They say it moves when the moon is full. Adana heard every word. The whispers crawled beneath her skin like cold ants. She pressed her palm over the mark on her shoulder, the dark winding shape that coiled like a sleeping snake. It had been there since her birth. Her mother once said it meant she carried destiny in her blood, but now even her mother avoided her eyes. A small tear slid down Adana's cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. Let them speak, she muttered to herself, her voice breaking. One day, they will see who truly carries power in this village. Her heart, once soft like morning dew, began to harden. The baobab above her sighed as a breeze passed through its branches. The leaves whispered, "Beware the heart that grows heavy with envy." But Adana did not hear. Her thoughts had already turned toward her sister, Amina, the Blessed One. Each dawn, the village awoke to Amina's voice. Her laughter filled the air like birdsong. When the sick came to her hut, they left healed. When she prayed for rain, the heavens opened. Even the elders bowed before her, saying she was chosen by the spirits. Adana would stand far from the crowd, watching. Her hands clenched, her breath shallow. Every cheer for her sister felt like a thorn pressed into her chest. She shines too bright, Adana whispered one morning as she watched Amina lift her hands to bless the children. The sun seemed to obey her, bathing her in gold. But even the brightest flame can burn itself out. From that day, Adana's laughter faded. She spoke less, smiled rarely, and wandered often, seeking answers in the quiet corners of the village. One night, when the moon hid behind thick clouds, she heard the call. A low hum, soft at first, then stronger, like the deep song of the earth itself. It came from beyond the hills, where the elders forbade anyone to go. The path was lined with ancient trees whose branches touched like clasped hands. Fireflies floated like lost stars, lighting the narrow trail that led toward the Red River Shrine. Adana stood at its entrance, her heart pounding. The air was thick with the smell of iron and old incense. She could feel eyes watching her, unseen, patient, ancient. Who calls me? She whispered into the dark. The water in the distance rippled, though no wind stirred. A voice, smooth and deep, answered from the shadows. You have come, child of the serpent. I have waited, her breath caught. Fear tugged at her feet, but pride pushed her forward. Are you the spirit they say must not be named? She asked. The voice chuckled softly. Names have power, little one. But yours has been whispered to me since the day you were born. A cold mist curled around her ankles. The earth beneath her seemed to tremble. What do you want from me? She asked, though her voice was barely a whisper. What you want from yourself? The spirit replied. To no longer live in your sister's shadow. To be more than forgotten dust beneath her feet. Adana's eyes filled with tears, but her heart thumped with something stronger. Desire. If I could take back what she has stolen? The wind rose sharply, shaking the branches above her. Then step forward, the voice said. But remember, the river gives, and the river takes. Adana took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness. That night, the villagers said they heard the trees whispering. Some claimed they saw red light flickering beyond the hills like fire on water. And the old baobab, the one that had always watched silently, groaned as though in pain. For the first time in generations, the spirit of the Red River stirred. And the balance of Ediora began to shift. The drums of Ediora beat louder than ever. Pastor Oba stood before a sea of faces, his hands lifted to the heavens as the crowd swayed to his words. The sun bathed him in gold, and to many he seemed more spirit than man. His voice carried power, the kind that shook hearts and made even skeptics bow their heads. "Faith," he cried, "is the fire that burns doubt to ashes." The crowd roared. Old women lifted their wrappers and danced. Men beat the ground with their staffs. And somewhere in the back, a merchant whispered, "Surely he speaks the language of angels." But as the cheers grew, a shadow began to stretch inside Pastor Oba's heart. Pride, slow and silent, crept in like a snake under dry leaves. At first he didn't notice it. When Amina would speak softly after sermons, her voice full of concern, he brushed her aside. "Oba," she would say gently, "remember, power without humility draws darkness." He would laugh, shaking his head. "Amina, you see visions in every breeze. Let the Spirit guide men of faith, and leave these dreams to the night." She looked at him then, the man she had once called a miracle. His eyes, once kind, now held a glimmer of something distant. She said nothing more. In the weeks that followed, his fame grew beyond Ediora. Caravans from distant villages arrived at dawn, bringing gifts, yam, honey, gold rings, offerings to the man who healed with a touch and spoke with the voice of thunder. When people knelt before him, he did not tell them to rise. When they called him the chosen of heaven, he no longer corrected them. And when Amina knelt beside him to pray, he often rose before she finished, saying, "The Spirit waits for no one." At home, the silence grew heavy. Once, their evenings were filled with laughter, Amina humming old songs, Oba telling stories of the road. Now, words had become sharp tools. "Why do you speak against me?" he asked one night, his tone cold as river stone. "You should be grateful for what the Spirit has given us." Amina's eyes shimmered with tears. Grateful? Yes, but also fearful. For when a man forgets who gave him his voice, even angels can turn their backs. He turned away, his jaw tight. "Your fear blinds you." His jaw tight. "Your fear blinds you. And your pride deafens you," she whispered. That night they slept back to back, separated by a silence louder than thunder. While their home crumbled under unseen weight, another heart stirred in the darkness, Adana's. Far from the village, where the red river glowed under the moon, she knelt before the ancient shrine. Her white robe was stained with dust and tears. Before her lay a small dove, its feathers trembling in her trembling hands. "O Spirit of the river," she began, her voice cracking. "They call her the Chosen One. They bow before her name while I am cursed with her shadow. But tonight I come not to beg, I come to claim what was taken." The wind shifted. The water rippled, though the air was still. Adana's fingers tightened around the bird. A single drop of blood fell to the soil, dark and glistening. "Give me her voice," she whispered. "Her power. Her light. Let the people see me," the river hissed, a deep, ancient sound. The trees bent as though listening. From beneath the water, faint whispers rose, overlapping like many tongues speaking one secret. "Child of envy," they murmured. "What you ask for has a price." Adana's tears mixed with the blood at her feet. "I will pay it." The water shimmered crimson. A shape began to rise, fluid, shifting, with eyes that burned like coals. "Then take what your heart desires," the Spirit said, its voice echoing in her chest. "But know this, every gift from the river must return to the river." Adana felt heat rush through her body. Her mark, the serpent on her shoulder, began to glow. She gasped, clutching it in pain, but smiled through the agony. Somewhere far away, as the moon dipped behind the clouds, Amina woke from a dream. Heart racing, tears in her eyes. She turned to wake her husband, but Oba was already gone, standing outside beneath the restless sky. The drums of Ediora began to beat again, slow, uncertain, like the heartbeat of a land about to remember its curse. The night hung heavy with silence. The red river shimmered like molten copper beneath the moon. Adana knelt on the riverbank, her breath trembling, her reflection shifting like smoke on the surface. The air smelled of earth after rain, alive, waiting. She whispered, "Spirit of the river, I have come." At first there was nothing, only the slow gurgle of water moving through stones. Then, a low hum rose from beneath the surface, deep and ancient, like a drum buried under the earth. The river began to swirl, glowing faintly red. "Who calls upon me?" a voice thundered, not from the air, but from within her own chest. Adana bowed her head. "I am Adana of Ediora, sister to Amina, the one the people call blessed. But I am forgotten. Give me her gift, and I will serve you," the river hissed. The voice grew darker, wrapping around her like smoke. "To gain light, you must offer blood. What is born of your flesh must seal this pact." Her hand trembled, but she did not hesitate. She drew a blade from her waist, the same blade her mother had once used to cut yams at harvest. She pressed it to her palm. The skin split open. Blood dripped slowly, thick and dark, into the red current. The water swallowed each drop greedily. "From this night," the spirit roared, "your breath will carry my will. Your shadow will walk between worlds. But remember, power is a river, it gives life. And it drowns." Thunder rolled across the hills. Adana's eyes glowed faintly as wind tore through the trees. Somewhere far away, a drum cracked in half, and dogs began to howl. By dawn, all of Ediora lay under an uneasy silence. The morning mist clung to the earth, and even the birds refused to sing. Roosters stood still on their perches, heads bowed, as though mourning something unseen. When the villagers reached the river, their hearts froze. The water, once clear as glass, ran crimson. It was not thick like blood, but its color bled across the stones and reeds. "The river remembers," whispered Elder Koro, his face pale. "Something sacred has been disturbed." Amina stepped closer, her bare feet sinking into the damp soil. A chill ran through her body. She felt the spirits whispering, not in words but in sensations, sorrow, warning, dread. She turned to the others. "Do not fetch water today," she said softly. "Let the river rest." That morning, Adana appeared in the marketplace. The villagers stared, not with fear, but awe. She seemed different, her steps lighter, her presence commanding. The morning sun caught her eyes, and for a brief moment, they flashed red, like embers buried under ash, Amina noticed. Her heart skipped. "Sister," she called gently. "Are you well?" Adana smiled, a calm, chilling smile. "I have never felt stronger." But when Amina reached to touch her hand, Adana pulled away. The air between them felt heavy, as if unseen spirits stood watching. Later that week, Pastor Oba stood at the pulpit, his arms outstretched as the villagers filled the church. The drums had been silent for days, and all came seeking comfort. He began his sermon, voice steady at first. "Brothers and sisters, the Lord watches over us." But suddenly his tone shifted. His eyes rolled back. Words poured from his lips, harsh, guttural sounds no one had ever heard. The congregation froze. Mothers clutched their children. The candles flickered, though no wind blew. Elder Koro rose from his seat, his cane trembling in his grip. "Stop, my son! These are not the tongues of heaven. They are the chants of the Red River." Oba gasped and fell to his knees. His hands shook violently as if unseen fire burned through him. "What? What did I say?" he whispered. No one answered. The people only stared, fear spreading like wildfire. Outside, the crimson river flowed quietly past, its surface calm once more, as though mocking the chaos it had begun, and deep below its stillness, the spirit whispered again, laughing softly. The night lay heavy upon Ediora, its silence broken only by the cry of distant owls. Amina tossed in her sleep, her body trembling beneath the woven mat. In her dream, she stood before the Red River, its waters still and dark as oil. When she bent to see her reflection, another face stared back, Adana's, smiling with a cruel calm. "You took what was mine, sister," the reflection hissed, eyes glowing like burning embers. Amina stumbled back, gasping, but her feet sank into the river's edge. She tried to pray, but her voice was lost to the wind. She awoke with a scream, tears streaming down her cheeks. "O Lord of Light," she whispered, clutching her chest, "why do you hide from me now?" But only the sound of the night insects answered. By dawn, a new unease had crept through the church. The holy candles that had burned for months refused to catch flame. Pastor Oba struck the flint again and again, sweat beading on his brow. "Maybe the oil has spoiled," one of the deacons murmured. But Amina's eyes told a different story. The fire was gone because the blessing had turned its face away. Soon, the blessed water that once healed the sick began to bring fever. Children cried through the night, and mothers whispered that God no longer walked with them. Rumors spread like locusts that pride and jealousy had opened a crack between heaven and Ediora. Under the sacred Iroko tree, where time itself seemed to hold its breath, Elder Koro called the council. The old men came wrapped in their agbadas, the lines on their faces deep with fear. "The river runs red once more," Koro said quietly, his voice trembling. "Its spirit does not wake without reason." One elder covered his face. "We sealed that name generations ago." But Koro only looked toward the horizon. "And yet," he said, "its shadow moves among us again." That evening, Koro sent for Amina. She came barefoot, her face pale and weary. Beneath the great tree, Koro's eyes met hers, filled with sorrow and truth too heavy for silence. "Child," he began, "you and your sister were not born as others. On the night of your birth, the moon was swallowed by darkness. One twin was touched by light, the other by shadow. The balance between you kept this land alive." Amina's breath caught. "Then Adana's fall? It shakes the very roots of Ediora," Koro said gravely. "If blood turns against blood, the kingdom will tremble, and the Red River will not stop until it has taken what it is owed." The wind rose suddenly, making the leaves of the Iroko whisper. It sounded for a moment like a voice, ancient, grieving, and waiting. Amina walked toward the Red River, her white wrapper fluttering like a lost prayer in the wind. The sky hung low, bruised with storm clouds. There, by the water's edge, stood Adana, her eyes glowing faintly red, her reflection rippling like fire on dark oil. "Sister," Amina called softly, "remember Mama's words. We were born under one sky. You carry her light, too." Adana turned slowly, her smile cruel and hollow. "You pray to a God who ignores you," she said, her voice layered with something ancient. "I serve the river that listens." Amina's tears fell into the water. "This path will destroy you." Adana's laughter echoed across the bank, deep, distorted, and far from human. The river answered with a hiss. Far from human. The river answered with a hiss. Pastor Oba watched them from a distance, his hands trembling. The voices that haunted his prayers now spoke in two tones, one gentle as morning light, the other dark as thunder. At night he dreamt of the twins' faces merging, forming a single being with eyes of gold and crimson. "Choose," the vision whispered. "Heaven or the river, truth or power." His sermons began to falter. The people no longer saw fire in his words. Even his own faith bent beneath the weight of the unseen. The next morning, strange winds swept through Ediora. The trees groaned as if in pain. Fields once green turned brittle overnight. Children clung to their mothers, and the drummers laid down their sticks. Not even the ancestors' whispers rose from the shrines. The air itself felt cursed, heavy, waiting. Then came the night of the Festival of Fire. Drums thundered again, desperate against the silence of fear. Flames danced in the sacred square, casting tall shadows on the mud walls. The villagers sang of old victories, trying to drown their unease. Yet Amina stood apart, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind carried the scent of smoke and something fouler, blood and river water. The stars flickered like dying embers. Somewhere beyond the crowd, the Red River stirred, and Amina knew. The true fire had not yet begun. The festival roared with life, drums beating, feet stamping, voices raised in joy. But amid the laughter, Amina's eyes clouded white like mist on morning water. The music faded in her ears, replaced by the hiss of the Red River turning to blood, flames swallowing the church, and her sister's voice crying her name from the wind. She stumbled toward Pastor Oba, trembling. "The spirits warn us, something dark stirs," she pleaded. But Oba, standing tall before the cheering crowd, only smiled. "You worry too much, woman," he said, pride shining where faith once lived. That night the sky grew restless. The stars hid, and thunder split the heavens open like a torn calabash. Lightning struck near the Red River, setting the forest ablaze in pale blue fire. The villagers froze where they stood, eyes wide with fear. The elders whispered in broken tones, "The spirit of the river is awake." Then the drums stopped, not by choice, but by dread, and silence fell heavy as mourning cloth. By the riverbank, Adana knelt, clutching her chest as if her heart burned from within. The air thickened with the scent of smoke and iron. From the red waters rose a form, neither man nor beast, eyes glowing like molten ember. It circled her, speaking in a voice that was many voices. "You called, child of shadow. Will you bear my fire?" Adana's scream echoed into the mist as the spirit poured into her. When she rose, her eyes burned red, her voice no longer her own. She walked toward Ediora, barefoot, her shadow stretching long and wrong. Inside the church, Pastor Oba's sermon filled the night, his voice booming about light and salvation. But then the doors burst open. Adana stepped in, her presence swallowing warmth itself. Instantly, every candle died, smoke curling like serpents toward the altar. The wind howled through broken windows, whispering ancient chants that no mortal tongue should speak. The congregation fell to their knees, crying, some fainting in terror. Pastor Oba stood frozen at the pulpit, staring at the sister who was once flesh and blood, now vessel of something far beyond human. Adana's body trembled with the spirit's dark fire, her eyes burning crimson as she stared at Pastor Oba. Her voice came out layered, part her, part something ancient. "You married light but desired power," she hissed. "I bring you both." The words struck like lightning. Shadows coiled around Oba's feet, whispering his own secret ambitions back to him. Sermons that moved kings. Hands that healed the blind, a world that knelt at his altar. The Red River Spirit, speaking through Adana, stepped closer. "Renounce the name that chained you," it said, "and I shall crown you a god among men." The church trembled. Oba's heart pounded like a drum. He saw visions, rivers parting at his command, golden crowns falling at his feet, nations singing his name. But then, through the storm of pride, he saw Amina's face, pale with grief yet shining with mercy. The vision burned away the glitter of temptation, leaving only shame and fear in its place. Through the swirling darkness, Amina stepped forward, her white garments glowing faintly as if lit from within. Her voice rose, calm, steady, cutting through the wind like a blade. "Ancestors of Ediora, and the God who gave me breath, hear me now," she cried. "Let truth stand where deceit reigns." The air grew heavy, the candles flickered to life on their own, and the boundary between the living and the spirit world thinned until the very walls of the church seemed to breathe. Amina's eyes filled with tears as she turned to Oba. "You cannot save a soul already given away," she whispered, "but you can save the land." Her words rang like thunder, rippling through the floor. Oba dropped to his knees, hands shaking, his pride shattered. Then Amina lifted her arms high and began to sing. A hymn older than the river itself, one only the first prophetesses ever knew. Her voice soared, pure and powerful, each note burning through the darkness. Light poured from her body, flooding the church. Adana screamed, her voice twisting into the unholy roar of the Red River Spirit. The shadows writhed and cracked under the weight of that song, the song of light and blood, as the battle between heaven and the river raged within her. The sisters stood at the heart of the ruined church, two reflections of the same soul. Amina's body glowed with divine brilliance, her every breath a prayer. Adana burned with unholy flame, her laughter echoing like thunder. When their powers collided, heaven and hell met in one blinding flash. The ground split open, pews splintered, and the very air screamed. Outside, the Red River boiled, its waves rising in fury as if mourning its own corruption. For a moment, all of Ediora seemed to hang between life and death, between light and shadow. When the brilliance faded, silence fell. The once holy walls stood in ruins, rain pouring through the shattered roof, smoke curled from the altar. The villagers who had once cheered in faith now knelt in awe and fear. At the center lay the twins, one faintly glowing like the dying embers of dawn, the other still as stone, her crimson eyes finally closed. Amina's breath came weak and shallow. Oba crawled toward her, tears mixing with the rain. She smiled softly, the corners of her lips trembling. "Tell them," she whispered. "Love without faith is a curse." Her fingers slipped from his, her light fading until only the memory of her glow remained. Oba let out a wail that tore through the storm, a sound of pure regret. He clutched her lifeless body, his voice breaking as he cried to the heavens. "Forgive me! I served pride, not purpose." His sobs echoed through the broken church as the Red River outside calmed, its color fading back to clear waters. But the people of Ediora would never forget that night, when heaven and hell met beneath one roof, and love itself demanded a sacrifice. And when the thunder finally faded, only the whispers of wind and distant birds remained. The village stood broken, roofs shattered, crops drowned, spirits hollow. Beneath the pale moonlight, the Red River shimmered faintly crimson, a haunting reminder that balance had been restored, but never without cost. The village that once danced beneath moonlit skies had become a place of shadows. The fields no longer sang with harvest. The maize rotted where it stood, and the yams turned black in the earth. Goats refused to drink from the river, their eyes wide with fear. Even the laughter of children, once bright as morning birds, had vanished. Mothers now whispered prayers over sleeping infants, tracing protective marks on their foreheads with ash and oil. Pastor Oba wandered through the silent market square where once his sermons drew crowds. Now he heard only echoes, faint, haunting notes of Amina's hymn carried by the wind, like a memory that would not die. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Elder Koro came to Oba's home. The old man's walking stick struck the ground with the rhythm of truth. "The gods punish not the sin of ignorance," he said, his eyes fixed on the pastor, "but of pride. You lifted your name higher than your faith, and the land has followed your fall." His words carried no anger, only sorrow. "Peace will not return," Koro continued, "until you cleanse both your spirit and this soil through true repentance." That night, Oba shed his fine robes and left his pulpit behind. Barefoot, he walked to the banks of the Red River. The villagers watched from their huts as he knelt upon the muddy ground. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted. The sun burned his skin by day, and the cold bit through his bones by night. He drank only from the cursed river, letting its bitterness cleanse what pride had stained. From afar, some wept for him. Others feared he had lost his mind. Each night, whispers rose from the water, sometimes in Amina's soft voice, other times in Adana's haunting tone, both calling his name. Both calling his name. On the 40th night, as dawn hovered beyond the hills, the river began to shimmer, half red, half gold. From its mist, 2 figures emerged. Amina stood radiant in golden light. Adana was cloaked in deep shadow. Their voices joined as one, calm and eternal. The soul of a man mirrors the woman he chooses, light or shadow, faith or desire. Oba fell to his knees, trembling, his tears falling into the river that had once cursed him. "Forgive me," he cried, "for loving power more than peace, for worshipping fame instead of truth." The sisters looked at him, neither smiling nor frowning, and slowly faded back into the mist. The Red River rippled gently, its hue turning silver under the newborn sun. And for the first time in many moons, the village of Ediora heard the wind sing again, not of sorrow, but of cleansing and quiet rebirth. When the sun rose over Ediora, a golden calm covered the land. The villagers, fearful yet hopeful, crept toward the riverbank. and there they found Pastor Oba, lying weak and pale but alive. His hands were clasped as if in prayer. The Red River, once tainted with blood and sorrow, now shimmered like glass beneath the morning light. Small fish leapt joyfully through its surface, scattering silver droplets into the air. Children ran through the village shouting, "The river breathes again! The river breathes again!" Mothers wept, and fathers bowed their heads. The elders gathered by the shore and declared, "Balance has been restored. Repentance has opened the gate between the living and the spirit world." In the years that followed, Oba abandoned his pulpit. He no longer sought crowds or glory. Instead, he used his trembling hands to rebuild what had been lost. Beside the ruins of the old church, he built a humble orphanage, House of Amina's Light. There, he sheltered abandoned children, teaching them not the power of prayer, but the heart behind it. Compassion is the true miracle, he would tell them, and envy the oldest curse. When villagers asked why he no longer preached, he smiled faintly and replied, "Faith without love builds pride, and pride destroys all." Generations later, when dusk settled upon Ediora, the villagers would still gather around the fires. The old ones would speak in low, steady tones, their words weaving through the smoke. Once, they would begin, two sisters were born, one of light, one of shadow, and when love forgot its faith, darkness came home. The children listened with wide eyes, clutching each other as the flames danced higher. That tale became the guiding heartbeat of the village, a story of pride and repentance, of jealousy and redemption. And when the elders grew silent, their final chant rose softly into the night. Power gained without purpose becomes poison. Envy is a river, smooth in its song, deadly in its depths. Faith is not in miracles, but in humility. The Red River now flows strong and pure, its waters reflecting both dawn and dusk, a living reminder that though darkness may rise, truth and repentance forever heal the land.